Well, well, well. If only the Democrats in 2001 and the anti-war left could see, what they've become today. It truly is, I think, a very sad week for, I guess the old-timey leftists who are still around. Those that remember the days of the Bush administration. Hell, those that remember the Vietnam War. Because now, not only the Democratic Party, but also just, your mainstream liberal voters, your very politically active and engaged people of the left on social media and, off of social media, have turned into ultra hawks, warmongers, in the mold of neoconservatives like Dick Cheney. Hell, they are on the same side now as Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney. I, of course, am referring to the fallout from this, very poorly sourced and just unbelievable, well, I should say improbable story published by the New York Times. The one which I talked about a few days ago, which I'll review briefly, is just that there's someone in the intelligence community, we don't know which agency, probably the CIA, who says that Putin maybe sort of kind of was paying bounties to Taliban fighters to kill U.S. soldiers. Now, why Putin would be doing this, who knows? And two, why would the Taliban need, to be paid bounties to go kill Americans when they've been doing it for 20 years? And three, given that they've been killing for, 20 years, it makes you wonder, why is it that the Taliban are killing the U.S. again? Is it because the Russians were paying them the whole time? No, actually, the reason why the Taliban are killing Americans is because the U.S. invaded Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban and, put them out of power. And the Taliban wants to control things. The Taliban wants to run their country, including the areas that their people are in and the areas that they're not in. So I'm not saying that the Taliban are good guys, but they have very clear motives. It's no mystery. And so it just flat out on its face does not make sense that they would need to be paid bounties by Putin to go hunt down Americans or something like that. So it's just an absurd claim. And so it's not surprising that this story was poorly sourced. They have one anonymous source. It used to be the standard in journalism that you needed, multiple anonymous sources who didn't, who were independent. You needed to independently verify these things. You couldn't just say, hey, I know some guy who, he works in the mailroom at the CIA, and he told me that Putin's really bad, and guess what? Trump's not doing anything about it. And so what this has turned into is an excuse for Democrats to support the continuation of the war in Afghanistan, because now that it's been published or claimed that Putin, for some reason, is paying off the Taliban, well then, if we leave Afghanistan, that's exactly what Putin wants, because, Russia, the country who suffered, in Putin's view, sort of the greatest geopolitical calamity of the 20th century, as a result, largely, of the war in Afghanistan, that is the collapse of the Soviet Union, something that was accelerated, if not, directly caused by the war in Afghanistan. So Russia certainly is not interested in invading Afghanistan themselves anytime soon. And the Taliban, fought the Soviet Union for, not as long as they've been fighting the Americans now, but for a really long time, like over a decade. So, it's not like the Taliban is going to come to power and all of a sudden be like, we love Russia. So there's just, nothing makes sense. The story is implausible and has, garbage sourcing. So to me, you just write this off, okay, fake news. This is how you tell that something is fake news. You have to look, okay, is it plausible, first of all? And then you have to look at, okay, well, is it sourced well? Well, this doesn't pass either of those tests. If something is implausible on the surface, but it has really good sourcing and seems like, oh, wow, this, seems like that their people are at least telling the truth about this, then you might be able to believe a story. If a story is plausible and if it rings true, so to speak, but the sourcing is a little weak, you might be able to still believe it to some extent. It's not hard evidence, but it in some way can confirm something you already knew. this is how, you're supposed to analyze a news story and sort of tell whether it matters or not. And so to me, I wrote this story off immediately because it doesn't pass the sniff test in any way. Unfortunately for the Orange Man bad crowd, which has replaced, the left in this country, we really have two parties now. We have the party of people who like Trump and the party of people who don't like Trump. And neither of them really seem to believe in much of anything. But this is particularly obvious in the case of the left that now the House Armed Services Committee, which is controlled by Democrats, put up an amendment to stop President Trump from, even if he wanted to, which I didn't necessarily, I'm still holding my breath on whether or not Trump was actually going to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. They are passing an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act saying he absolutely cannot pull the troops out, ever. They just put these vague goals in there and said, okay, well, you have to meet these certain conditions before the troops can ever come out of Afghanistan, and guess what? They're never going to be met because it's vaguely defined, and the Congress can just say, no, troops are never coming home. And if they passed this as one bill, you'd say, okay, well, Trump can just veto it. Well, they didn't. They put it in the NDAA, which is, a massive bill that funds the military because this has to be passed every year because the military legally under the Constitution cannot exist for more than 2 years, I believe it is, at a time. So they always have to pass an NDAA to sort of reauthorize the military. It's a loophole in the Constitution that they've gotten to keep the war state going forever. So Trump probably will not veto the NDAA over this amendment, and he'll just sign it into law, and now forever, the U.S. will never be able to leave Afghanistan, even if you had a president who wanted to and who was really bound and determined. And, guess who's the only Republican that voted in favor of this amendment on the committee? I think I've already, let it slip. It was Liz Cheney of Wyoming, Dick's young daughter. She's not young, but, Dick Cheney's daughter. So congratulations, Democrat. You've, I guess you've sided with She-Vader. Isn't that what they used to call Dick Cheney? They called him Darth Vader. And what was so bad about Darth Vader? Was it just that he, blew up innocent planets? Was that, wasn't that what we didn't like about, about Darth Vader? Isn't that why they compared him to Dick Cheney? Because Dick Cheney would just blow up random countries, not care about the ccitizens, just, got to teach them a lesson. It sounded a lot like Darth Vader. Well, now the Democrats apparently sound a lot like Darth Vader to me, because they want to blow up Afghanistan just to spite Putin, just to teach Putin a lesson. Meanwhile, in reality, in Realville, Putin is probably laughing his ass off because these Dems are so stupid that they believe some nonsensical story planted in the New York Times. And now the U.S. is going to get bogged down in Afghanistan for even longer, which is great for Putin because Putin knows that, Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires because the empire that he, worked his whole career to try and, serve, the Soviet Union, died in Afghanistan. And the United States will too. Afghanistan won't be the reason why we collapse. We're collapsing, right now for a myriad of reasons, but Afghanistan will be one of them. Just, like in the case of the Soviet Union, Afghanistan wasn't the only reason the Soviets came apart, but it was a big reason. So yeah, we're approaching the end of America, and Putin feels just fine about it. Putin doesn't have this need to pay off a bunch of bounty hunters to hunt down individual Americans because Putin just wants to kill all 320 million of us, so he's going to hire hitmen to take each and every one of us out. He doesn't have to do that because we're doing it ourselves. America is shot themselves in the foot by invading Afghanistan, and I don't want to say that the Dems just shot us in the head, but they certainly added insult to injury. They poured salt over that wound in our foot. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.